My name is Ranger Thomas Keel. For more than 2 decades, I wore the patch of the Alaska Department of Natural Resources. My duty was to keep watch over some of the most untamed, unforgiving wilderness left in North America. I've seen storms tear through mountain passes so violently that entire ridges vanished in whiteout within minutes. I've seen grizzlies rip through hunting camps, rivers freeze solid overnight, and rescue operations turn into body recoveries. But there is one place, one stretch of land so feared, so avoided, that it lingers in every ranger briefing, every whispered warning between bush pilots, and every story told around the fire when the radios go quiet. We call it the Valley of Death. That's not an exaggeration, not folklore stitched together to scare rookies. It's the name written in classified ranger files and scrawled into the margins of lost expedition reports. A valley so vast, so hostile, that even helicopters are forbidden from flying over it. The instruments fail, compasses spin uselessly. The air itself feels heavy, as if the valley resents intrusion. And those who go in, more often than not, they don't come out. Ask any Alaskan bush pilot. Off the record, they'll tell you, "I don't fly over that valley, not anymore." Veterans with decades of experience turn their planes the other way, no matter how much money they're offered. Hunters, miners, even scientists, all drawn to it at one time or another, leave their camps intact, their rifles leaning against trees, their food untouched, their fires still burning. But the people are simply gone. Some blame weather, sudden landslides, thin ice, avalanches, starvation. But when you've seen the reports as I have, the patterns don't fit. It isn't the chaos of nature. It's something else, something selective. The indigenous stories go back centuries. The Athabascans and other native peoples warned early settlers never to cross into the valley. They spoke of land that breathes death, a place where the earth itself rejects human presence. Some tell of giants that live beneath the ground, others of spirits that mimic familiar voices to lure travelers deeper. Every version carries the same ending. If you enter, you do not return. Now, most Americans have never heard of this place. Men came back shaken, refusing to speak about what they'd seen out the window. One pilot, a veteran with over 3,000 hours of flight time, tore off his headset and said only this: "It was looking up at us." You hear enough of these stories and you stop dismissing them. You start realizing that the wilderness doesn't always obey the rules we write in textbooks. I remember my own first encounter clearly. I was stationed less than 30 miles from the valley during a missing persons search. We'd been deployed after 3 hikers failed to return from a week-long trek. Their last radio call placed them near the valley's ridge. I hiked out with 2 other rangers, and even before we reached the drop-off, the forest had gone silent. No birds, no wind through the brush, just stillness. So complete it pressed against my ears until I swore I could hear my own blood moving. And then there was the smell. Not of rot, not of fire, but of something metallic, sharp, unnatural. The others noticed it too. We stood on that ridge, looking down into an endless sweep of dark green and rock. Nothing moved, but I swear to you, I felt it staring back. That was years ago, and still I don't sleep well. Still I dream of the silence, of that heavy air pressing in on us. Still I wake up with the certainty that what's inside that valley is not empty wilderness. This is why I'm speaking now. Because you need to know the truth. Because too many files stay buried. Too many families are told their loved ones died in accidents when the reality is far stranger. And this is just the beginning. You're watching MindFuel. If you want the stories that others refuse to tell, the files that never reach the public eye, subscribe now. Stay with me, because what waits in Alaska's Forbidden Valley is not done taking lives. And before this story ends, you'll understand why even helicopters refuse to go over. Long before there were rangers, before there were helicopters or maps, the first warnings of the valley were spoken by those who lived with the land itself. The Inupiat, the Athabascan, and the Yupik peoples, tribes who knew every mountain pass, every river current, every season of this vast wilderness, avoided that place. They had a name for it, though it varied from village to village. In translation, it meant the land that breathes, or the ground that swallows. The elders said the earth itself moved in that valley, not with earthquakes or storms, but as if something alive stirred beneath the rock. Hunters who pushed too close spoke of hearing voices on the wind, calling them by name. Sometimes it was a family member's voice, sometimes a child's laughter, sometimes the cry of someone lost. Those who turned back lived to tell the story. Those who followed the voices never came home. The stories run deep. One Athabascan tale tells of a man who tracked a caribou across the ridge and followed it down into the valley. When he didn't return, his brother searched for him. Days later, he found the man's bow propped against a tree, his footprints circling in the snow, tighter and tighter, until they simply stopped. No sign of struggle, no trail leading away, just a circle of prints ending in nothing. Animals know too. To this day, caribou herds veer sharply when they approach the valley. Bears skirt the ridge, refusing to enter. Even sled dogs are said to growl and snap at their harnesses rather than be led across. The silence of wildlife isn't just unusual, it's a warning. And then there are the lights. Strange orbs that dance over the tundra at night, glowing faintly, vanishing the moment you try to approach. The elders said they were not fire, not stars, not anything natural. They were bait, lures meant to draw the curious further in. I spoke once with an Athabascan elder who'd lived his entire life near the Yukon, less than 100 miles from the valley's edge. His words have never left me. He said, "It doesn't want you there, and if you go, it keeps you." This wasn't just superstition meant to scare children into staying close to home. These warnings were survival. The tribe. Stay with me, because the deeper this story goes, the closer we get to understanding what still waits in Alaska's Forbidden Valley. As the decades passed and Alaska became a state, the old warnings did not fade. They began to take shape in official records. From the 1940s through the 1970s, the Valley of Death shifted from whispered legend to something far more troubling. A repeat entry in military and aviation reports. Bush pilots, the men who know Alaska's skies better than anyone, were the first to notice it. Flying over the valley, their compasses would swing wildly, needles spinning as though caught in a storm of unseen magnetism. Pilots wrote of navigation systems collapsing mid-flight, altimeters giving false readings, and radios cutting out with no explanation. For some, the loss was only temporary. For others, it was final. The Air Force logged its own incidents during routine reconnaissance missions. Several aircraft reported sudden mechanical failures directly above the valley. Engines would sputter, lights would flicker, and controls stiffened until pilots were forced to turn back. In multiple cases, radio operators listening from nearby bases recorded something they could not explain. Instead of distress calls, instead of the clipped voices of men under strain, what came through was static, and beneath it, faint whispers. And then came the crashes. Reports exist, though many are still sealed, of aircraft that vanished after crossing over the valley. Entire planes dropped from radar. No survivors were ever recovered. In most cases, no wreckage was ever found. Alaska has swallowed its share of wrecks across glaciers and rivers, but this was different. Search and rescue teams combed the ridgelines, swept the tundra, flew grid after grid across the suspected zones. Nothing. It was as though the valley left no trace of what it consumed. One file, marked confidential but later leaked by a retired ranger, describes a 1978 incident that is still whispered about among helicopter pilots. A team of hunters had gone missing near the valley's border. A rescue chopper was dispatched from Fairbanks, crewed by seasoned men who had flown in every condition Alaska could throw at them. Their last radio transmission was short, calm, and routine. They had visual contact with the tree line. Minutes later, the old stories spoke of voices calling your name. The modern files tell the same story in another way, through static on radios, through vanished aircraft, through crews swallowed whole. And here's the part that should make you uneasy. None of this happened in the distant past. These reports aren't relics. They stretch well into living memory. And the deeper you go into those decades, the more it becomes impossible to dismiss the legend as folklore. This is MindFuel. Subscribe and stay with me, because the official record isn't just incomplete, it's carefully hidden. And if the truth about Alaska's Forbidden Valley were fully known, we would never look at those mountains the same way again. Legends and reports are one thing, but nothing prepares you for the words of those who claim to have seen the valley for themselves. These are not stories passed through generations or filed away in red-stamped folders. These are the voices of people who walked too close, flew too low, and barely returned. The first came from a bush pilot in the early 1990s. He had been ferrying supplies to a remote hunting cabin when weather forced him to take a longer route, one that skimmed dangerously close to the valley's edge. He later told investigators that his compass froze, his altimeter dropped to 0, and every gauge on his panel blinked dead. With no instruments, he was flying blind over a region notorious for swallowing planes. But it wasn't just the systems that failed. Looking down, through thin stretches of ice, he saw something that nearly cost him control of the aircraft. He described it as a shadow the size of a ship, gliding beneath the frozen surface. It moved against the current, cutting through the ice as though it weren't there. He circled once, against his better judgment, and swore it shifted with him, matching his turn, tracking the aircraft. When his engine sputtered, panic set in. By some miracle, he cleared the ridge, and the moment he crossed, his instruments blinked back to life as if nothing had happened. He landed hours later, shaking so badly he couldn't stand. For years, he refused to fly that route again, telling younger pilots, "If you see the valley, keep your eyes on the sky. Don't look down." Then there was the story of the hikers. 4 friends, experienced in Alaska's backcountry, decided to set camp near the valley's border. They were never seen again, except for one. The lone survivor was found wandering miles from the site, dehydrated, delirious, his gear abandoned. He never told authorities exactly what happened, but in fragments, over hospital interviews and hushed conversations, one detail emerged. On the second night, as the fire burned low, they heard something impossible. Not wind, not animals, but the low churn of machinery, like engines rumbling far beneath the earth. The sound rose and fell, echoing across the ice, until it seemed to come from directly below their feet. After that, the survivor said nothing. He radioed in, but no signal left his unit. So he approached. Step by step, he drew closer. The voice on the tape cracks when he describes what happened next. The figure grew less distinct with every step, edges blurring, until it was no longer a man at all, but a shifting shape. Transparent, dissolving into the mist that rose from the ice. The last words on the tape are clear. "It wanted me closer. It wanted me in the valley." Then static. That ranger was never seen again. His gear was found months later, scattered on the ridge. The tape was logged, sealed, and buried in the archives. Only a handful of us ever heard it, and fewer are willing to speak about it now. These first-hand encounters form a pattern. Machines fail. Shadows move where nothing should be alive. Sounds of engines echo beneath ground no man has ever mined. And sometimes, the valley doesn't just swallow you, it calls you. This is MindFuel. If you're hearing this now, understand that every one of these accounts comes from men and women with nothing to gain and everything to lose. Subscribe, stay with me, and listen carefully, because the next chapter in this story is not just about the land. It's about what may already be waiting beneath it. By the late 20th century, the legend of Alaska's Valley of Death had grown too large to ignore. It wasn't just a place whispered about in ranger stations or told in half-believed stories by pilots. It appeared, quietly, on official documents. If you know where to look, there are maps, U.S. Geological Survey overlays that mark a wide swath of the region as restricted airspace. The official explanation is simple, almost too simple. Unstable permafrost, unpredictable winds, and dangerous thermal updrafts that make flying over the valley a risk. On paper, it's about safety. But the rangers who've seen those maps know better. The restrictions are drawn with too much precision, too much intent. It is not the wilderness they're avoiding. It is something inside it. I once spoke with a whistleblower, a man who had served in military intelligence during the height of the Cold War. His voice shook when he shared what he claimed satellites picked up in that valley during the 1960s. Not cracks in the ice, not shadows, but shapes, structures, geometric outlines where there should be only frozen tundra, perfect arcs, straight lines, domes, the kind of formations nature doesn't build on its own. The data was classified immediately. Public reports were rewritten, attributing anomalies to glare, to shifting ice sheets, to instrument error. But those who handled the raw images knew better. The whistleblower told me, they weren't rocks. They weren't glaciers. They were built. Some of the accounts go further. Bush pilots who strayed too close reported seeing glints of metal under the ice. Strange, smooth curves that reflected sunlight like the surface of a buried dome. A few even spoke of shapes that looked like tunnel mouths, arched openings, perfectly rounded, that seemed to vanish when you circled back for another pass. No photographs survived. Cameras jammed. Film was fogged. Digital lenses recorded only white static when turned toward the valley floor. But the stories repeat. Metallic structures, entrances that descend into blackness, outlines of something massive beneath the ice. The official word remains unchanged. Dangerous weather, unstable ground, keep out. But off the record, the message is far more unsettling. Don't go near the valley, not because... You'll hear different explanations depending on who you ask, and none of them bring any comfort. The cryptid hunters. They say what's in that valley isn't new at all. To them, it's something old, older than us, older than the land as we know it. A relic that never died out. They talk about a predator that walked with giants, something that learned to wait, to hide, to take only what it needed so it could survive undetected. They'll tell you that's why nothing is ever left behind when people vanish there, because this thing doesn't waste. It consumes everything. Then there are the paranormal researchers. To them, it isn't about flesh and blood. They call the valley a thin spot, a place where the line between our world and somewhere else has worn down to threads. They speak about people stepping into the wrong place at the wrong time and being pulled through, as if the forest itself had a door you can't see until it's too late. They bring up the silence, the way the forest goes mute when someone disappears, as proof. They say that silence isn't just absence of sound, it's the air hollowing out, like a vacuum. And then, you'll meet the survivalists. They don't bother with creatures or dimensions. To them, it's simpler and darker. They believe the US government carved out the valley on purpose. They say it's a proving ground, a place to test the kind of technology no one's supposed to know exists. Sonic weapons that can rupture organs, invisibility cloaks, drones that can make a person vanish without a trace. To them, the missing aren't victims of folklore, they're collateral damage. The price of experiments never meant to reach the public. But here's the part no one wants to say out loud. What if all of them are right? What if something prehistoric was found in those woods decades ago, and instead of killing it, the government studied it? What if in trying to contain it, they tore open something unnatural, a door they couldn't shut? And what if now, whatever lives in that valley isn't one thing, but many? An overlap of worlds, a wound in reality, a trap with no single explanation. It would mean the hunters, the researchers, the survivalists, they've all been circling the same truth from different sides. And it would mean the valley doesn't just take people, it keeps them. The story that still gets whispered the most, the one that makes even the skeptics fall quiet, is from 2013. A team of 4 researchers had been studying seismic activity near the valley. They weren't thrill seekers, not cryptid hunters, not ghost chasers. They were scientists with credentials, university-backed, funded, equipped. The kind of people who measured everything, logged everything, and trusted only what could be proven. For months, they planned the expedition. The idea wasn't to enter the valley, just to reach its edge, place their instruments, and get out. They carried thermal gear, satellite phones, GPS trackers, even body cams. Every move was scheduled, every risk accounted for. To them, it was just field work. And then came the last transmission. At 9:47 p.m. on a frozen March night, one of their satellite phones crackled to life. The first voice was calm, maybe even joking about the wind picking up. Then another cut in, sharper, nervous. That's not the wind. A pause. The sound of static, grinding like teeth. Then, a final sentence, rushed, half swallowed by distortion. It's not the wind. It's... And then nothing. The line stayed open for 3 minutes. Just static. No shouts, no screams, no goodbyes. When the search team went in, what they found only deepened the mystery. The researchers' camp was untouched. Their gear, expensive, organized, still there. Their notebooks half filled with data. Their food, left cooking over the fire as if they had stepped away mid-meal. The fire was still smoldering when rescuers arrived. There were no tracks leading away. Not human, not animal. The snow around the camp was untouched, smooth as glass, except for one detail. Less than 100 yards from the tents, etched into a wall of ice, were claw marks. 4 of them, deep gouges that carved through frozen rock like it was nothing. And they weren't low to the ground, the way a bear or mountain lion might leave them. These marks began above a man's head, and the highest reached over 12 feet into the air. The official report blamed weather, disorientation, exposure. But every person who saw those marks knew the truth. Weather doesn't leave claw trails. And when the families of the... Alaska is full of places that punish the unprepared. Blizzards, avalanches, thin ice, the endless cold. But this valley, it doesn't just kill, it erases. It takes people, equipment, entire aircraft, and leaves nothing behind but questions carved into ice and silence that should not exist. The government tells us it's just unstable weather, bad terrain, dangerous winds. Locals whisper that it's cursed, that the land itself resists trespassers. But if neither explanation is true, if the claw marks, the vanished transmissions, the ground that seems to breathe are all pointing to something else, then the question becomes unavoidable. What is waiting in Alaska's off-limit valley?